Hello and welcome to Campaign Chronicles. With just 19 weeks to go until the first round of voting, this is France 24's regular update on what's happening ahead of the French presidential election. Coming up in today's programme, who stands to gain politically from the Eurozone crisis? François Hollande visits Berlin, but who calls the shots in the Socialists' team? And Faces and Places finds out why the pride of France, its wealth of cultural events, isn't immune to austerity measures. We begin, though, with a roundup of the week's news with centrist hopes for third time lucky. There's a first taste of the 2012 campaign at the Senate, and the far right complains that there's a plot to keep them quiet.
The opening shots in the 2012 electoral campaign. Left and right traded blows in a symbolic vote at the Senate. That after a controversial debate about voting rights for non-European residents. Despite passing in the Senate, the bill can't go any further unless the National Assembly changes hands next year. But the Conservatives rolled out the big guns, including Prime Minister François Fillon, to oppose the move. Three's a charm for the Modem party as centrist François Bayrou is officially a candidate. He says the economic crisis has vindicated his diagnosis and he's the man of the moment.
It's a shock that's needed. After this election, things need to change.
Bayrou then expanded his vision with his first Twitter interview. The Modem leader then trying to be a modern one too. Access denied for Marine Le Pen. Her planned debate at a Parisian university was cancelled after anti-Front National activists turned up. That's a first since Marine Le Pen has begun softening the party's image, leaving her furious.
Will the powers that be allow these left-wing militias to lay down the law in our country?
Top of the tweets. Nicolas Sarkozy was the most tweeted French politician in November, despite trailing in the polls. The reason for at least some of these 117,000 tweets? His high-profile role at the centre of the Eurozone crisis. But lots of hashtags doesn't necessarily translate into lots of votes. Smaller candidates like the Greens' Eva Joly are also in the top 5. But the president's own tweeting isn't yet up to Tweet of the Week standards. That goes to Cécile Duflot, the boss of the Green Party, thanks to this exchange with Industry Minister Eric Besson. She said he'd be better off checking the safety of France's nuclear reactors than arguing on Twitter. Perhaps a view shared by the president after Sarkozy reportedly claimed Besson spent too much time on the microblogging site.
Well, I'm joined in the studio now by Luke Brown, Campaign Chronicles' very own reporter. Now, Luke, elections are still some way off, and the Eurozone crisis doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. Is anyone actually gaining from that?
We have seen around Europe there have been lots of incumbent governments that have been chucked out by voters because of the Eurozone crisis. Will France be the one to buck that trend? Nicolas Sarkozy, of course, he hopes so, that perhaps he wants to demonstrate that he is the only man trusted to be in control. That's why we've seen all those summits in the past week in Marseille, Brussels, or in Paris. That does leave François Hollande, the socialist rival, something of a tough job. He's got to prove that he is a serious alternative, but do that without spooking either the markets or the floating voters. Last weekend in Berlin, with the German socialists, he laid the blame very much at the door of the Conservatives that are in control of both of those countries. That is to say, Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy.
All right, well, what's the biggest point of discord then between the two sides?
Well, here in France, it's very much the golden rule that is the sticking point. That's the obligation to balance your budget. You have them in some form or another in Germany or in Spain, but France does not have one. Nicolas Sarkozy helpfully pointed out on Monday that is pretty much because of the socialists avoiding any change to the constitution. They say this is something of a political trap. They say it's all very well and good saying that everything would be fine if you had a golden rule, but this is rather ignoring the fact you've been in office for much of the past decade and your economic measures have not really helped. It has to be said, at the moment this isn't going to go anywhere until at least after the election. That's according to Nicolas Sarkozy himself. That is handy for him too. It means he can do nothing nothing very much and still blame it on the socialists.
All right, Luc, thank you very much indeed. Well, as Luc just mentioned, this week also saw Francois Hollande head to Berlin. He was invited by the German SPD party for their annual conference. Thanks to the Eurozone crisis, Franco-German ties have rarely been so prominent. The socialists need to make Hollande a realistic rival to Nicolas Sarkozy, and that means they're being careful, almost paranoid, some would say, about controlling the media's access to their man.
Francois Hollande's trip to Berlin, a chance to show French voters he counts on the world stage. He and his team know they need the media to do that, but for his Director of Communications, Manuel Valls, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. That tight rein leaving Hollande little time to offer his opinion on the day's news. In the end, playing it safe.
I think this Franco-German friendship is worth more than a little upset.
And that, seemingly, is that. This press conference isn't for the cameras, and Manuel Valls is there to ensure those ground rules are respected. That stonewalling may betray socialist concerns. Their man's biggest weakness, his perceived lack of gravitas. His public image then has to be controlled and the media's access limited. The party much prefers pictures like these. Hollande is the guest of honour at the German Socialist Party's annual Congress. A shared stage and a common objective: propose an alternative to the current dominant double act of Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy.
I see this relationship as balanced. I don't believe that the solution is this board of directors.
And what better way to dispel any doubts over the Socialist Party's attachment to the European project than a few words of German? A warm reception then, but it's not the end of the game of cat and mouse between media and candidate. Hollande also met with French socialist voters based in Berlin, but once again the press aren't welcome, as Manuel Valls makes clear. So what then was the atmosphere of this hush-hush get-together? This participant explains.
When Hollande's with the political activists, he loves to be friendly and make jokes. Or maybe that's not the image he wants to get across at the moment.
That then may be the key. Francois Hollande is renowned for his sense of humour, easygoing manner and friendliness with the media. But that's no longer the image that his team wants to put across.
His words are important, but he has to weigh them carefully and ration them for the right moment.
Playing hard to get then may be against the candidate's better nature. The priority for Hollande's team, turning him into a serious contender and persuading voters he does have the stature to be the next president.
Well, it's time now for Faces and Places, our weekly rendezvous with French voters. This week, the focus is on one thing the French reckon they do better than anyone else: cultural events. To support their ambitious shows, many cultural companies rely on state subsidies, at least for a part of their income. But as the economy hits the skids, funds may also run dry.
On va attendre d'avoir mis la première, comme ça on verra l'angle.
Gerard is working on his new creation at his street theatre company's workshop. This circular arc will soon become a 4-metre wide metal sun filled with fire, and this waterfall created from sand will represent the US-Mexico border fence in a play about migrants in America.
This will be 50 metres long. At some point the wall will disappear. But so far it's rather utopian. The wall only disappears in the show, not in real life, unfortunately.
The Carabosse Theatre Company transforms places by using elements such as water and fire. These impressive productions have been the reason for the company's success worldwide. 15 years ago, Gerard, a then computer scientist, decided to change his job.
Ever since I've been doing this job, it doesn't feel like I'm working. It's just sheer pleasure. You wake up in the morning, come here to the workshop. We've got the means to think, well, I'd like to create this. And off you go. So it's great. Our job consists of giving people pleasure. You've got jobs far worse than this.
Gerard knows he's lucky, especially in these times of economic crisis, but it's wage inequality that really makes him angry.
I'd much prefer it if people who are earning a salary would be able to make a living, instead of people on low salaries struggling to even pay the rent. I'm not saying we need to kill the rich to give their money to the poor. I just think there's got to be another way of sharing, another way of reconstructing our society, because anyway, it won't last like this. It's just not possible.
When it comes to money, the Caravos company is cautious. Subsidies only account for 15% of the company's income, and Gerard is already feeling the effect of the economic crisis.
In festivals in general, the amount dedicated to artistic creation is falling because the budget is staying the same, but the cost of the technical part is increasing. Everything is much more complicated to negotiate. Organisers fight over fees, such as with a €25,000 budget, they'll start quibbling over €300.
But somehow Caravos pulls it off, maybe because the company works hard to create something new and different, always wanting to stun audiences with their productions.
Well, that's all for this week from Campaign Chronicles. Don't forget to check out the show's Facebook page and tell us what you think. And of course, the programme is back once again next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.